On June 6, 1944, at approximately 5:20 hours, a German artillery officer stationed above the Normandy coastline identified the largest amphibious fleet ever assembled approaching French shores. This observation marked the beginning of Operation Overlord, the Allied invasion that would determine the outcome of World War II in Western Europe. The German defenders' realization of overwhelming Allied material superiority in that moment encapsulated the fundamental industrial imbalance that characterized the entire Normandy campaign. This account examines the events of that morning through the lens of tactical observation and strategic miscalculation. Before we proceed with this analysis, if you value detailed evidence-based examinations of World War II military operations, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment indicating your location. We appreciate hearing from our global audience of history enthusiasts. The German coastal defense system, known as the Atlantic Wall, represented one of the most ambitious fortification projects of the Second World War. Construction began in 1942, following Adolf Hitler's Directive 40, which called for the creation of a continuous defensive barrier stretching from Norway to the Spanish border, a distance exceeding 2,400 kilometers. The project consumed enormous resources during a period when Germany was simultaneously engaged in major operations on the Eastern Front. The Atlantic Wall's construction involved the placement of over 15 million cubic meters of concrete and 1.2 million tons of steel reinforcement bars. Organization TOT, the German Military Engineering Group, coordinated the work using both German construction units and impressed laborers from occupied territories. By mid-1944, the system included approximately 12,000 fortified positions, ranging from massive gun casemates housing naval artillery pieces to small concrete pillboxes for machine gun positions. The fortification design incorporated multiple defensive elements: coastal batteries mounted guns, ranging from 75mm to 406mm caliber, positioned to provide interlocking fields of fire across likely invasion beaches. Infantry strongpoints included concrete bunkers with steel doors, often built into natural terrain features like cliffs or dunes. The system also incorporated extensive obstacle belts, millions of mines, steel tetrahedrons called Czech hedgehogs, and wooden stakes topped with explosives that German troops called Rommel's asparagus, after Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, who intensified their placement in early 1944. However, the Atlantic Wall suffered from fundamental weaknesses that would prove critical. The fortifications were distributed unevenly, with heaviest concentrations at the Pas de Calais, where German intelligence expected the main Allied assault. Many positions remained incomplete as of June 1944. Construction materials were increasingly scarce as Allied bombing disrupted transportation networks. More significantly, the defenses were designed as static positions, contrary to German military doctrine that emphasized mobile warfare and armored counterattacks. The defense of the Normandy sector fell to Army Group B, commanded by Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, with Colonel General Friedrich Dollmann's 7th Army holding the actual coastline. The 352nd Infantry Division, a unit that would play a crucial role on D-Day, had arrived in the Normandy area in March 1944. Unlike many coastal defense units composed of overage reservists or foreign volunteers, the 352nd included a corps of combat veterans from the Eastern Front, supplemented by younger conscripts. German artillery units in Normandy, including those of the 352nd Artillery Regiment, operated various gun types. Many batteries utilized captured French or Czech weapons, reflecting Germany's practice of incorporating equipment from defeated enemies. The most effective coastal defense guns were purpose-built weapons in reinforced concrete casemates, positioned to fire along the length of invasion beaches rather than directly out to sea, a tactical arrangement that complicated their neutralization by naval gunfire. The officer corps defending Normandy in 1944 represented a cross-section of Wehrmacht experience. Many had served on multiple fronts since 1939. They understood combined arms tactics, artillery fire control, and defensive operations. However, they were increasingly aware of Germany's deteriorating strategic position, particularly regarding air power and industrial capacity. This awareness created a complex psychological state, professional competence coupled with growing recognition of unfavorable odds. The German miscalculation regarding the invasion location represented one of the war's most consequential intelligence failures. This failure resulted partly from effective Allied deception and partly from German preconceptions about logical invasion sites. Understanding this miscalculation requires examining both Allied deception operations and German assessment methodologies. Operation Fortitude, the Allied deception plan, consisted of two main components. Fortitude North suggested preparations for an invasion of Norway, while Fortitude South, the more important element, created the impression of a massive invasion force assembling in southeastern England opposite the Pas de Calais. The Allies constructed dummy equipment, generated false radio traffic, and used double agents controlled by British intelligence to feed misleading information to German intelligence services. The deception effort included the creation of the fictional 1st U.S. Army Group, FUSAG, supposedly commanded by General George S. Patton, whose reputation made him a credible invasion commander in German estimation. The Allies positioned inflatable tanks, fake landing craft and dummy aircraft at bases in southeastern England. German reconnaissance flights photographed these installations, while signals intelligence detected radio communications from the Phantom Army Group. German intelligence assessment of Allied invasion intentions relied on several factors. The Fremde Heer West, Foreign Armies West, section of German military intelligence, led by Colonel Alexis von Roehner, analyzed available information about Allied capabilities and intentions. Von Roehner's assessment significantly overestimated Allied ground forces in Britain, placing the figure at approximately 85-90 divisions, when actual strength was closer to 35 to 40 divisions available for invasion operations. This overestimation had direct consequences for German deployment. The 15th Army, Germany's strongest formation in France with approximately 19 divisions, remained concentrated in the Pas de Calais region even after the Normandy landings commenced. German High Command believed the Normandy operation might be a diversionary attack, with the main assault still to come at Calais. This assessment kept substantial German forces out of the Normandy battle during the critical first weeks. Geographic factors reinforced German focus on the Pas de Calais. The Strait of Dover represented the shortest distance across the English Channel, approximately 33 kilometers compared to roughly 150 kilometers to Normandy. From a logistics perspective, Calais also offered the most direct route toward Germany and sat closer to major ports. These factors made Calais the logical invasion site, a conclusion that Allied planners understood and exploited. The German command structure also contributed to the intelligence failure. Adolf Hitler maintained personal control over strategic reserves, including armored divisions. The German military operated under a system where major decisions required authorization from the Führer headquarters. This centralization slowed response times and prevented field commanders from making rapid tactical adjustments based on developing situations. Weather assessment provided another element of German miscalculation. German meteorological services, lacking weather stations in the Atlantic due to Allied naval supremacy, had limited ability to forecast conditions accurately. In early June 1944, German weather analysts predicted that rough seas and poor visibility would continue for several days, making large-scale amphibious operations impossible. This assessment led to a reduction in readiness levels. Many officers left their posts, including Rommel himself, who traveled to Germany for his wife's birthday. The Allies, benefiting from weather data collected from Atlantic stations and ships, identified a brief window of marginally acceptable conditions for June 5 to 6th. Supreme Allied Commander General Dwight D. Eisenhower made the decision to proceed, despite imperfect weather, accepting the risks. The German defenders, convinced invasion was impossible under prevailing conditions, were caught unprepared. The actual state of German defenses in Normandy on June 6, 1944, reflected the combination of intensive recent preparation and longer-term resource constraints. Examining the specific units, positions, and readiness levels provides essential context for understanding the German perspective on the invasion's first hours. The 352nd Infantry Division held a critical sector of the Normandy coast, including the area designated as Omaha Beach by Allied planners. This division had formed in November 1943, incorporating the remnants of the 321st Infantry Division with new recruits. Its commander, General-Lieutenant Dietrich Kreis, was an experienced officer who had previously commanded the division on the Eastern Front. The 352nd's presence at Omaha was not fully detected by Allied intelligence, a rare German intelligence success that would make the landing there far more costly than anticipated. The division's structure included 3 infantry regiments, the 914th, 915th and 916th. Each regiment contained 2 battalions, plus various support units. The 352nd Artillery Regiment provided fire support, with 4 battalions equipped with a mix of German 105mm and 150mm howitzers, along with captured French weapons. Total divisional strength approached 12,000 men, though this included rear area personnel not positioned on the beach defences themselves. Artillery positions were carefully sited to provide coverage of the beaches while offering protection from naval bombardment. Gun crews operated from reinforced concrete casemates with walls up to 2 meters thick. These positions were designed to withstand anything except direct hits from the heaviest naval guns. Observation posts connected to firing batteries by telephone landlines were positioned on high ground overlooking the coast, providing artillery officers with clear views of approaching targets. The Wehrmacht's defensive concept for repelling invasion emphasized destroying the enemy at the waterline. Rommel advocated this approach, arguing that Allied air superiority would prevent effective counterattacks once enemy forces established themselves ashore. He pushed for maximum combat power, positioned directly on the coast, in contrast to other German commanders who preferred holding mobile reserves inland for counterattacks. This disagreement reflected a fundamental tension in German defensive doctrine. Traditional Wehrmacht tactics emphasized maneuver and counterattack rather than static defense. However, the realities of Allied air supremacy made mobile operations extremely hazardous. Rommel's experience fighting the Allies in North Africa had convinced him that movement during daylight would invite devastating air attacks. His solution was to concentrate defenses at the high water mark, attempting to prevent any successful landing. The beach obstacles installed under Rommel's direction represented a significant engineering effort. By June 1944, the Normandy beaches featured multiple obstacle belts positioned between high and low tide marks. These included steel structures, wooden ramps topped with mines, and concrete tetrahedrons, all designed to rip open landing craft hulls or detonate when touched. Behind the beaches, many fields that might serve as landing zones for gliders or paratroopers were flooded or fitted with poles to destroy aircraft attempting to land. Mine deployment formed another critical defensive element. The Germans laid approximately 6 million mines along the French coast, with significant concentrations in the Normandy sector. These included anti-personnel mines in defensive positions, anti-tank mines on roads and possible armor approaches, and specialized mines attached to beach obstacles. However, the mining program remained incomplete. As of June 6th, ambitious plans called for placing 60 million mines, but shortages of materials and labor prevented achieving this target. German troops in the coastal positions lived under increasingly stressful conditions in the months before the invasion. Allied air attacks disrupted supply lines, making it difficult to receive food, ammunition, and replacement equipment. The Normandy garrison operated under constant alert, never knowing if a given day might bring the long-anticipated invasion. This prolonged tension affected morale and readiness, though German military discipline maintained combat effectiveness. The armada that appeared off the Normandy coast represented the culmination of more than 2 years of planning, construction, and assembly. The scale of Operation Neptune, the naval component of Operation Overlord, exceeded any previous military operation in history. Understanding the composition and capabilities of this fleet illuminates why German defenders found the sight so overwhelming. The invasion fleet consisted of approximately 6,900 vessels of all types. This total included 1,213 warships, ranging from battleships to destroyer escorts, and more than 4,000 landing craft of various designs. An additional 1,600 vessels provided specialized functions including minesweepers, rescue ships, and headquarters vessels. 8 Allied nations contributed ships to the operation, with the United States and United Kingdom providing the bulk of the fleet. Naval combat power included 6 battleships: the American USS Nevada, Texas, and Arkansas, and the British HMS Warspite, Ramillies, and Nelson. These ships mounted guns ranging from 14-inch to 16-inch caliber, capable of firing projectiles weighing up to 2,100 pounds to ranges exceeding 20 kilometers. 22 cruisers provided additional firepower, while 119 destroyers served both as bombardment vessels and screening units, protecting larger ships from potential German naval or air attacks. The landing craft represented perhaps the most critical element of the invasion force. The Allies had developed numerous specialized designs to address specific aspects of amphibious assault. The landing craft, Infantry, LCI, could carry 200 troops. The landing craft, Tank, LCT, transported vehicles and cargo directly onto beaches. The landing ship, Tank, LST, served as a seagoing vessel capable of crossing the channel under its own power while carrying substantial cargo loads. The most numerous craft type was the Landing Craft Vehicle Personnel, LCVP, commonly called the Higgins boat after its designer Andrew Higgins. These craft, measuring 36 feet in length, could carry 36 combat-equipped soldiers or a vehicle. Their shallow draft allowed them to approach very close to shore, while the bow ramp enabled rapid unloading of troops or cargo. The Allies employed approximately 2,500 LCVPs on D-Day, ferrying troops from transport ships positioned offshore to the landing beaches. Specialized vessels reflected Allied engineering innovation applied to amphibious warfare problems. Dday duplex drive. Sherman tanks featured flotation screens and propellers, enabling them to swim from landing craft to shore. DUKW amphibious trucks, known as ducks, could travel through water and then drive directly onto roads inland, maintaining continuous supply flow from ships to advancing troops. British Hobart's Funnies, named for Major General Percy Hobart who developed them, included flail tanks for mine clearance, bridging tanks and armored vehicles carrying massive bundles of logs to fill anti-tank ditches. The assembly of this fleet required solving enormous logistical challenges. Southern England became a vast military camp in the months before invasion, with ports, harbors, and anchorages filled with vessels. Security measures attempted to conceal the buildup, though the sheer scale made complete concealment impossible. German reconnaissance aircraft photographed British ports, but the Allies' deception efforts directed German attention toward Dover and southeast England rather than the actual embarkation areas farther west. The naval plan called for 5 invasion beaches spread across 50 miles of Normandy coastline. American forces would assault Utah Beach on the western flank and Omaha Beach in the west center sector. British forces would land at Gold Beach and Sword Beach, while Canadian forces would assault Juno Beach. Each beach landing involved carefully choreographed phases, with initial waves landing at H-hour, 0630 for most beaches, 0630 for Utah, followed by subsequent waves at timed intervals. The German observation posts above the invasion beaches represented critical nodes in the coastal defense system. These positions, typically concrete bunkers built into elevated terrain, provided artillery forward observers with commanding views of the sea approaches. The duties and capabilities of these observation posts and the officers who manned them determined how quickly German forces could respond to the invasion. Artillery observation posts in the Wehrmacht were staffed by trained forward observers, typically officers or senior non-commissioned officers with specialized skills in target identification, range estimation, and fire control. These observers maintained direct communication with firing batteries via telephone landlines, which provided more reliable connections than radio under combat conditions. The observer's primary mission was identifying targets and directing artillery fire onto them with maximum accuracy and minimum delay. The equipment available to forward observers included high-quality optical instruments. German optics manufacturers, particularly Carl Zeiss, produced binoculars and observation telescopes with exceptional clarity and magnification. Standard artillery binoculars provided 6x or 10x magnification with wide fields of view. Larger scissors telescopes, mounted on tripods, offered higher magnification for detailed target examination. Range-finding equipment, including stereoscopic rangefinders, enabled observers to calculate distances to targets with considerable accuracy. Observation post construction emphasized both visibility and protection. The typical post consisted of a concrete bunker with narrow observation slits providing panoramic views while offering protection from shell fragments and small arms fire. Walls often exceeded 1 meter in thickness. Interior spaces included areas for personnel to shelter during bombardment, communication equipment, and map tables for plotting target locations. Many posts incorporated multiple observation positions at different heights and angles to eliminate blind spots. On the early morning of June 6th, observers in these posts would have been conducting routine watch duties. Standard procedures called for systematic scanning of assigned sectors at regular intervals, with particular attention to any changes from previously observed conditions. Weather conditions that morning included clearing skies after several days of storms, with visibility improving as dawn approached. Sea conditions remained choppy with moderate waves, conditions that German assessment considered unsuitable for large-scale amphibious operations. The initial sighting of the invasion fleet would have occurred in the pre-dawn darkness, with observers potentially detecting darker masses against the lighter horizon as civil twilight began around 05:30 hours. As visibility improved, the scale of what lay offshore would have become increasingly apparent. Standard procedure upon detecting potential targets called for immediate reporting through the chain of command, while simultaneously beginning to calculate firing solutions. The reporting process involved multiple steps. Forward observers reported to their battery commanders, who assessed the information and determined whether to open fire. Battery commanders reported to regimental headquarters, which coordinated the fire of multiple batteries. Regimental headquarters reported to division, which could authorize engagement and coordinate with adjacent units. This multi-layered system ensured proper coordination, but also introduced delays, particularly problematic when reporting something as unprecedented as the D-Day Armada. German artillery fire control doctrine emphasized accuracy and economy of ammunition. Forward observers calculated firing data including range, bearing, and any corrections for wind, temperature, or target movement. This data was transmitted to the firing battery, where gun crews made the necessary adjustments to their weapons. Initial ranging rounds allowed observers to spot the fall of shot and make corrections before firing for effect with all battery guns. The effectiveness of this system depended on maintaining communications and having adequate ammunition stocks at battery positions. German forces in Normandy faced increasing difficulties with both factors in the months before invasion. Allied air attacks damaged telephone lines and forced ammunition stockpiling in dispersed locations to prevent loss to bombing. These factors would constrain German artillery response to the invasion, even where guns remained operational. The naval bombardment that commenced in the early hours of June 6, 1944, represented the application of massive firepower against German coastal defenses. Understanding the scale, coordination, and effects of this bombardment requires examining both the capabilities of the bombarding ships and the targeting procedures employed. Allied naval gunfire doctrine for amphibious operations called for preliminary bombardment to suppress or destroy coastal defenses before landing craft reached the beaches. The plan for Normandy involved a relatively brief preparatory bombardment compared to Pacific theater operations, approximately 40 minutes at most beaches. This shorter duration reflected concerns about achieving surprise and the limited period of suitable tide conditions. The battleships provided the heaviest firepower. USS Texas, for example, mounted 10 14-inch guns in 5 turrets. Each gun could fire a 500-pound armor-piercing or high-explosive shell to ranges exceeding 23,000 meters. The ship carried approximately 1,200 rounds of 14-inch ammunition for the operation. Fire control systems on these ships included optical rangefinders, mechanical computers for calculating firing solutions, and radar for detecting fall of shot, representing the most advanced naval gunnery technology then available. Cruisers added medium-caliber firepower. Ships like HMS Belfast mounted 12 6-inch guns, while American cruisers typically carried 12 8-inch guns. These weapons fired at higher rates than battleship main batteries, making them effective for sustained fire against area targets or for responding rapidly to targets of opportunity. The cruisers could also maneuver more readily than battleships, allowing them to engage targets along extended stretches of coastline. Destroyers proved particularly valuable for close-in fire support. Their smaller size and shallower draft enabled them to approach nearer to shore than larger vessels. American destroyers typically mounted 5 5-inch guns, capable of engaging targets at ranges up to 15,000 meters. The 5-inch gun's higher rate of fire, approximately 15-20 rounds per minute per gun, made destroyers effective for suppressing anti-ship batteries and machine gun positions. Target assignment involved coordination between naval forces and ground commanders. The bombardment plan identified specific German positions to be engaged, with primary targets including known artillery batteries, concrete casemates, and observation posts. Naval liaison officers attached to ground units provided target information and adjusted fire as needed. Spotter aircraft from cruisers and battleships also flew over the target areas, reporting fall of shot and helping to identify additional targets. The actual effectiveness of naval bombardment against German fortifications varied significantly. Concrete casemates proved resistant to anything except direct hits from the heaviest guns. Many German positions, particularly artillery casemates, featured thick overhead protection that could withstand near misses. However, the bombardment's sheer intensity had important effects beyond physical destruction. The continuous shelling disrupted communications by severing telephone lines, forced defenders to take cover rather than manning weapons, and created a psychological impact that degraded defensive effectiveness. At Omaha Beach, naval gunfire initially followed the pre-planned bombardment schedule, but proved insufficient to suppress all German positions. The 352nd Infantry Division's defensive installations, particularly those in drawers and defilades, survived the initial bombardment largely intact. However, as the situation on the beach deteriorated, with American troops pinned down by German fire, destroyers made a critical intervention. Ships including USS McCook, USS Carmick, and USS Doyle closed to within 1,000 meters of shore, deliberately accepting the risk of running aground to provide direct fire support to troops ashore. This close-range naval gunfire proved decisive at Omaha. Destroyers engaged specific German strongpoints, firing at ranges where they could achieve very high accuracy. The 5-inch guns could penetrate bunker firing slits or blast away earth and concrete protecting defensive positions. This intervention, combined with the efforts of troops on the beach and additional support from Army and Navy demolition teams, eventually suppressed enough German positions to enable the landing force to move inland. Naval gunfire support continued beyond the initial assault phase. Warships remained on station off the beaches for days and weeks after June 6th, providing fire support for ground operations. As Allied forces advanced inland, naval guns continued to engage targets within range of the coast, including German counterattacks, troop concentrations, and supply routes. This sustained fire support represented a significant combat multiplier for Allied ground forces during the critical period while they established and expanded the lodgment. The disparity between Allied and German war production capabilities constituted perhaps the most fundamental factor determining the war's outcome. Examining specific production figures for key weapons systems reveals the magnitude of the industrial imbalance that became manifest on D-Day. American industrial mobilization for World War II represented the largest and most rapid expansion of manufacturing capacity in history. Between 1941 and 1945, the United States produced approximately 300,000 military aircraft, 86,000 tanks, 193,000 artillery pieces, 2,400,000 trucks, and substantial tonnages of virtually every other category of military equipment. This production occurred while simultaneously supporting substantial portions of Allied partner nations' military requirements through Lend-Lease assistance. Tank production figures illustrate the quantitative disparity. In 1944, American factories produced approximately 29,000 tanks and self-propelled guns. The M4 Sherman medium tank, the primary American tank type, accounted for the majority of this production. German industry in the same year produced approximately 18,000 armored fighting vehicles, including tanks, assault guns, and tank destroyers. However, German production focused increasingly on heavier, more complex types like the Tiger and Panther tanks, which required significantly more manufacturing hours per unit than the Sherman. The Sherman tank, often criticized for its technical inferiority to German heavy tanks, reflected American production priorities. The Sherman's relatively simple design, reliable mechanical systems, and ease of manufacturing enabled mass production. A Sherman required approximately 10,000 man-hours to manufacture. A German Tiger I tank required approximately 30,000 man-hours. This meant that American industry could produce 3 Shermans for every Tiger Germany could manufacture, even before considering Germany's increasing shortage of skilled labor and materials. Aircraft production showed even more pronounced disparities. In 1944, the United States produced approximately 96,000 military aircraft of all types. Germany produced approximately 39,800 aircraft the same year, a respectable total, but less than half the American figure. When British and Soviet production is added to American totals, the Allied advantage becomes overwhelming. Britain produced approximately 26,000 aircraft in 1944, while Soviet production reached approximately 40,000 aircraft. The implications of these production disparities affected every aspect of military operations. For the Normandy invasion, Allied air superiority was so complete that German ground forces operated under constant threat of air attack. On D-Day itself, the Luftwaffe flew approximately 300 sorties over all of France, facing more than 14,000 Allied sorties, a ratio of nearly 50.1. German fighter pilots who did engage Allied aircraft faced overwhelming odds, contributing to unsustainable loss rates that further degraded Luftwaffe capability. Naval construction showed similar imbalances. The United States commissioned more than 200 major combatant ships during the war, including battleships, carriers, cruisers, and destroyers. American shipyards also produced hundreds of escort vessels, submarines, and the thousands of landing craft required for amphibious operations. Germany's naval construction focused primarily on submarines, with surface ship construction severely constrained by Allied bombing of shipyards and steel shortages. The merchant shipping comparison proved equally significant. Victory and Liberty ships, standardized cargo vessel designs, rolled off American ways at extraordinary rates, with construction times eventually reduced to under 2 weeks for some yards. The U.S. produced approximately 2,700 Liberty ships alone during the war. This maritime construction replaced merchant tonnage losses from submarine attack and provided the shipping capacity necessary to move enormous volumes of troops and supplies across the Atlantic. Raw material availability underlay these production disparities. The United States possessed abundant domestic supplies of iron ore, coal, petroleum, copper, and most other materials required for war production. Germany faced increasing shortages of critical materials, particularly petroleum and high-grade iron ore. Synthetic fuel production never achieved targets, and by 1944, fuel shortages significantly constrained military operations. The Luftwaffe, for example, reduced training hours for pilots due to fuel scarcity, contributing to declining pilot quality compared to Allied aviators. The labor force constituted another critical advantage for the Allies. American war production employed millions of workers, including large numbers of women who entered industrial jobs previously held by men now in military service. This represented mobilization of previously underutilized labor capacity. Germany, having employed high percentages of its workforce in industry since the pre-war period, had less untapped labor capacity to mobilize. Increasing reliance on forced labor from occupied territories proved less productive than voluntary workers. Technological development and production integration also favored the Allies. American industrial practices emphasized standardization, interchangeability of parts, and continuous production improvement. German industry produced numerous variants and modifications even within a single weapon type, complicating logistics and maintenance. The German tendency to pursue technical sophistication sometimes undermined quantity production, spending resources on developing superior weapons that entered service too late and in too few numbers to affect outcomes. The German defensive effort in Normandy faced systematic degradation from multiple factors operating simultaneously. Examining the first week of the campaign reveals how Allied advantages in materiel, air power, and naval gunfire progressively reduced German combat effectiveness, regardless of individual unit quality or tactical competence. The 352nd Infantry Division's defensive battle at Omaha Beach, while initially successful in inflicting heavy casualties on American assault troops, could not be sustained once Allied forces gained footholds on the beach. German defensive positions were designed to create overlapping fields of fire across the beach approaches, but they lacked depth. Once Allied troops penetrated the beach defenses and began moving inland through the draws and valleys leading off the beach, German strongpoints became isolated and could be attacked from flanks or rear. Combat losses on June 6th significantly reduced the 352nd Division's strength. Casualty estimates for the division range from 1,200 to 2,000 men killed, wounded, or missing on D-Day itself, representing losses of 10 to 20% of combat strength in a single day. These losses fell disproportionately on infantry units actually manning beach defenses, meaning that combat elements suffered much higher percentage losses than overall division figures indicate. Junior officers and NCOs, who led defensive efforts from forward positions, sustained particularly heavy casualties. German artillery, after initial successes engaging the invasion fleet and troops on the beaches, faced increasingly effective counter-battery fire from Allied naval guns. Naval fire control, aided by spotter aircraft and the sheer volume of fire available, systematically engaged German artillery positions. Many batteries, even those in concrete casemates, sustained damage that reduced their fire effectiveness or eliminated them entirely. Destruction of observation posts and severing of communication lines further degraded artillery capability. The inability to conduct effective counterattacks proved decisive in the campaign's opening phase. German doctrine called for immediate armored counterattacks to destroy invasion forces before they could establish themselves ashore. However, executing these counterattacks proved impossible due to multiple factors. The 21st Panzer Division, the only armored unit within range of the beaches on June 6th, spent crucial hours of the morning awaiting authorization to move, time that allowed Allied forces to expand their beachheads. When the 21st Panzer Division finally attacked in the afternoon of June 6th, it advanced without air cover, into a sky dominated by Allied fighter bombers. Allied aircraft, particularly P-47 Thunderbolts and Hawker Typhoons equipped with rockets, attacked the division's columns continuously. Rocket-firing aircraft proved particularly effective against armored vehicles. A single Typhoon could carry 8 60-pound rockets, each capable of penetrating tank armor or disabling vehicles through near misses. The 21st Panzer Division's attack reached the coast between the British beaches, but withdrew after failing to break through Allied positions, having sustained significant losses without achieving meaningful results. Additional German reinforcements attempting to reach Normandy faced similar difficulties. The 12th SS Panzer Division, positioned approximately 150 kilometers from the beaches, required multiple days to reach combat positions, a movement that should have taken hours. Allied air attacks, destruction of bridges and road networks, and the requirement to move primarily at night to avoid airstrikes all contributed to the delay. When units finally reached the front, they arrived piecemeal rather than concentrated for decisive counterattacks. German command arrangements contributed to coordination problems. The division of authority between Rommel's Army Group B and Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt's OB West created confusion regarding who could authorize movement of armored reserves. Higher headquarters, including Hitler's Supreme Command, maintained control over strategic reserves and insisted on approving their commitment personally. These command inefficiencies meant that German forces responded to Allied landings with delays measured in days rather than hours. A fatal deficit in a campaign where the first 24-48 hours determined outcomes. Allied air supremacy extended beyond direct attacks on German units to comprehensive interdiction of the entire transportation network supporting German forces. Fighter bombers attacked trains, trucks, bridges, and any movement detected on roads and railways. This interdiction campaign, which had intensified in the weeks before D-Day, meant that German units struggled to obtain fuel, ammunition, and replacement equipment. Artillery batteries that expended ammunition during D-Day often could not obtain resupply, forcing them to ration remaining stocks and reducing their fire support capability. The material attrition rate faced by German forces in Normandy exceeded their capacity to replace losses. Each German tank destroyed represented a permanent loss. Replacement tanks from Germany arrived in small numbers and faced the same interdiction and air attack problems that affected all reinforcements. Allied losses, while substantial, were rapidly replaced. The flow of supplies and equipment from England continued uninterrupted, with Liberty ships unloading at artificial harbours constructed off the invasion beaches, once the Allies established beachhead control. By June 12th, 6 days after the invasion, Allied forces had linked all 5 landing beaches into a continuous front approximately 80 kilometers wide and penetrating up to 20 kilometers inland in some sectors. More than 300,000 Allied troops had landed, along with approximately 50,000 vehicles and 100,000 tons of supplies. German forces, while maintaining a continuous defensive line, had been pushed back from the coast and suffered cumulative losses approaching 10,000 men without equivalent replacements available. The Normandy campaign's outcome was determined not by the tactical results of individual battles, but by the cumulative effect of material attrition that German forces could not sustain. Examining the campaign's progression through August 1944 reveals how Allied industrial and logistical advantages progressively degraded German combat capability until organized resistance collapsed. The battle for Normandy entered a grinding phase after the initial invasion week, with German forces establishing defensive positions in the Norman hedgerow country, terrain that favored defense and complicated Allied advances. However, even as German troops demonstrated tactical proficiency in defensive operations, the fundamental material imbalance continued to erode their position. Allied strategy evolved to leverage their material advantages systematically. Operation Epsom, June 26-30, and Operation Goodwood, July 18-20, were British offensives designed to fix German armored reserves around Caen, while American forces prepared for a breakout operation farther west. These operations consumed Allied resources, hundreds of tanks destroyed, thousands of casualties, but Allied forces could absorb such losses and continue operations without pause. German forces, inflicting heavy casualties and destroying large numbers of Allied tanks, found their own losses unsustainable. Tank replacement rates illustrated this dynamic clearly. After Operation Goodwood, British armoured units that had lost 400 tanks received complete replacement within days from stocks in England and from production. German armoured units destroyed or damaged in the same period received minimal replacements. By late July, German panzer divisions in Normandy, nominally with establishment strengths of 150-200 tanks, operated with 30 to 60 serviceable vehicles. This progressive degradation occurred not through catastrophic battlefield defeats, but through steady attrition that could not be made good. The American breakout operation, Operation Cobra, July 25-31, demonstrated the decisive effect of concentrated Allied material power. The operation began with a carpet bombing attack by nearly 2,000 heavy and medium bombers, dropping approximately 4,000 tons of bombs on German positions in a rectangular area measuring roughly 5 kilometers by 2 kilometers. This bombardment devastated German defensive positions, though it also inflicted casualties on American troops from bombs falling short. Following the bombardment, American armored and mechanized divisions advanced through the shattered German lines. German defenders, stunned by the bombing and lacking mobile reserves to contain the breakthrough, could not prevent American forces from breaking into open country. Once clear of the hedgerow terrain, American armored columns advanced rapidly, exploiting their superior mobility, and encountering German resistance that was fragmented and uncoordinated. The Falaise Pocket Encirclement, August 1221, resulted from the collapse of German defensive cohesion following the American breakout. As American forces swung east and British-Canadian forces attacked south, substantial German forces, elements of two armies, became trapped in a shrinking pocket around the town of Falaise. The ensuing battle destroyed German combat power in Normandy as a fighting force. Estimates of German casualties in the pocket range from 50,000 to 80,000 men, with thousands of vehicles destroyed or abandoned. The Falaise pocket's destruction resulted less from superior Allied tactics than from the physical impossibility of German forces extricating themselves from the trap while under constant air attack. German columns attempting to withdraw faced continuous strikes from Allied fighter bombers. Roads became clogged with destroyed vehicles. Artillery and heavy equipment had to be abandoned when fuel supplies ran out or recovery became impossible. The resulting losses destroyed the organizational structure of German forces in Normandy. Units ceased to exist as coherent formations. By late August 1944, organized German resistance in Normandy had collapsed. Allied forces liberated Paris on August 25th and advanced toward the German border. German casualties for the Normandy campaign totaled approximately 450,000 men killed, wounded, or captured. Material losses included approximately 1,500 tanks, 3,500 artillery pieces, and 20,000 vehicles of all types destroyed or captured. These losses exceeded Germany's capacity to replace while simultaneously sustaining operations on the Eastern Front against Soviet offensives. The campaign's outcome vindicated the Allied strategy of applying overwhelming material superiority against German forces. German tactical skill, defensive preparation, and individual soldier quality proved insufficient against an enemy that could sustain losses, replace equipment continuously, dominate the air completely, and maintain uninterrupted logistic support. The industrial equation that became apparent to German observers on the morning of June 6th played out over subsequent weeks until German military power in France disintegrated. The D-Day invasion and subsequent Normandy campaign exemplify the decisive role of industrial capacity in modern warfare. The outcome of the campaign was determined less by operational excellence or tactical innovation than by fundamental disparities in material resources and productive capacity. Understanding these factors provides essential context for assessing the Second World War's trajectory in 1944-1945. Military historians analyzing D-Day have emphasized various factors contributing to Allied victory: operational surprise, naval gunfire effectiveness, air supremacy, and the quality of Allied troops and leadership. While all these elements contributed, the underlying determinant was the vast material disparity between the combatants. German forces in Normandy fought effectively within their constraints, but those constraints, imposed by inferior numbers, limited supplies, and unsustainable attrition, made defeat inevitable. The industrial comparison between the Allied coalition and Germany represented not merely quantitative differences, but qualitative distinctions in economic organization and capacity. The American economy's productive potential, the British Empire's resources, and Soviet industrial recovery after the 1941-1942 defeats created a material imbalance that German industry could not counter. Germany's economy, despite Albert Speer's rationalization efforts and increasing reliance on forced labor, could not match the output of the Allied coalition. The strategic bombing campaign against Germany, while controversial regarding its direct military effectiveness, had significant indirect effects on German war production. The requirement to divert resources to air defense, including hundreds of thousands of anti-aircraft guns, millions of artillery shells and combat aircraft that could have been used elsewhere, represented a substantial drain on German military capacity. The disruption of transportation networks and petroleum production by late 1944 constrained German military operations increasingly severely. The Normandy campaign also demonstrated the limitations of defensive strategic approaches against enemies with material superiority. German defensive preparations in France, while extensive, could not compensate for the inability to concentrate sufficient forces at the invasion point or to conduct effective counterattacks after the landing. The Atlantic Wall represented substantial investment in static defenses that proved inadequate against an enemy capable of applying overwhelming force at selected points. From the German perspective, the invasion's psychological impact equaled its military significance. The appearance of the vast Allied armada on June 6th made tangible what many German officers had intellectually understood, but perhaps not fully internalized: that Germany faced a coalition with essentially unlimited material resources. This realization, coming after years of casualties on the Eastern Front and increasing evidence of Germany's deteriorating position, contributed to the collapse of morale that characterized German forces in the war's final year. The Allied success in Normandy validated the strategy of postponing the Second Front until sufficient forces and materiel had been assembled to ensure success. The decision to delay invasion from 1943 to 1944, while politically controversial and creating tension with Soviet allies bearing the brunt of fighting against Germany, enabled the accumulation of overwhelming force that made failure unlikely. The alternative, an earlier invasion with fewer resources, would have risked a costly repulse that could have delayed ultimate victory significantly. The Normandy campaign's legacy extends beyond its immediate military results. The operation established precedents for large-scale amphibious assault that influenced post-war military doctrine. It demonstrated the potential of air-land coordination, the value of specialized equipment for specific tactical problems, and the importance of logistics sustainment for modern military operations. These lessons shaped military thinking for decades after 1945. For those interested in detailed examinations of World War II operations, the Normandy campaign repays careful study. The campaign's extensive documentation, including Allied planning documents, German defensive records, and post-war analyses, provides rich material for understanding how industrial-age warfare functioned. The human cost, tens of thousands of casualties on both sides, underscores the stakes involved and the consequences of strategic miscalculation.